Hello, I'm Tim Tuller, Canon for Music at St. John's Cathedral, with a couple of words about the music for this Sunday, March 30th. Our prelude and postlude this Sunday both have the same title, and at first glance they appear to be the same piece by the same composer, but they are two different pieces. The opening Fantasia in C minor by J.S. Bach is actually the first part of his Fantasia Fugue in C minor. This piece was written in around about sometime between 1708 and 1717. We're not quite sure the exact year, while Bach was in Weimar. And at this time, it was often traditional for a composer to pair a sort of freestyle piece, more or less a freely composed section, with a more strict fugue as the second half. And so what I'll be playing for the prelude this Sunday is the first part of the Fantasia Fugue in C minor, the Fantasia portion, which is, again, it sort of attempts to kind of take on the feel almost of an improvisation, sort of a freely composed piece. The postlude is also titled Fantasia in C minor, and this is from a later work that we don't have the fugue for. It probably was going to be a second Fantasia and Fugue in C minor, but the fantasy piece was the only section that was actually composed, and so I'll be playing that as the postlude. Now it's interesting, both of these pieces are in the key of C minor, and in Bach's time, during the Baroque period, certain keys tended to have certain sort of agreed upon feelings that composers tended to overlap with. For example, the key of G major during this time and D major were often considered very sunny, bright, happy, joyful keys. And the key of C minor tended to be a very dark, sober key that often the pieces I find in that key from this time period are very, very appropriate for Lent. They just have that very sort of somber, sober sort of gravity to them. And so I think both of these pieces make wonderful voluntaries for the season of Lent. The offertory this Sunday is one of my very favorite choral pieces ever. It is the Civitas Sancti Tui by William Byrd. William Byrd was a late 16th and early 17th century composer in England. And he was a recusant Catholic during a time of great religious strife and turmoil in England. And during much of the time that he was active, he would have faced great danger being a Catholic at this time in England, were it not for his personal protection by Queen Elizabeth I. He was very close to Queen Elizabeth I and probably enjoyed her pretty direct protection from persecution for his religious beliefs. And this motet, it was written in 1581 for a cappella choir, and it is the text of it reads basically, "Your holy city has become a wilderness. Zion has become a wilderness. Jerusalem has been made desolate." Now, of course, that's a rather common scripture that we are familiar with for the season of Lent, and many composers have written pieces on this. And it's from the Lamentations of Jeremiah. But with Byrd, this piece almost certainly has a double meaning, because he is also expressing the grief that he felt over the situation of his fellow Catholics in England at this time. And you can really clearly hear, when you hear this piece, the unusually poignant and personal directness of expression that's unusual for a composer at this time in this age. And so I think that's probably very true, that it was a very personal piece for Byrd. I hope you enjoy the music this Sunday.